from PhilSteele.com. He is joining us right out of the gates. And, Phil, thank you so much for your time this morning. How are you doing?
I am doing good, Nate. How about yourself this morning?
Not bad. I wish we were having you on to discuss, your upcoming predictions and upcoming previews. But the fact that more than 40% of all major college football is going to be postponed until the spring, that's at least what they tell us, and some are trying to play. It's a mess, isn't it?
It is. Now, I would say this. If we do play football and we've got the 3 Power 5 conferences and the American, and I think we'd have a legitimate college football playoff. And if that happens, I don't think the Big Ten and the Pac-12 would actually play in the spring. They would put them too far behind the other leagues. So, a lot depends on if the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 stick to what they're saying right now, which is they're following through and playing. And if they do, believe it or not, back on page 352 of the magazine, I list my Heisman contenders. 8 of the 10 would still be playing. 3 of my 4 playoff teams are still in there. So, we'd be missing a couple of teams, but I think it would still be a good college football season provided they play.
Oh, no question. I mean, look, I think we have to be realistic about, where the powers are right now in college football. I mean, in my opinion, last year you should have had 3 SEC teams get into the college football playoff, but that wasn't the case. I'm curious, Phil, usually we see these Power 5 conferences in complete unison with their decision-making, and it does appear that there is some serious void and between what's happening with the Big Ten and how the Pac-12 is following them like sheep, and then what's going on with the ACC and also the SEC and the Big 12.
Yeah, there definitely is. And, it's something where they say the FBS needs one commissioner running the whole thing, but who knows? Maybe it'll work out best this year. If indeed we have the 3 leagues playing, at least we'll have some football. And so, if it works out, then and we're playing football this fall, then maybe we don't need one overall commissioner, because maybe one overall commissioner would have canceled the whole thing.
It's interesting because the NCAA rarely interjects on these decisions that they mostly leave up to the conferences and the commissioners and the individual presidents. But when something goes wrong, that's when the NCAA comes in and starts needling and proddling and getting involved. But it would be nice in some sense to have a governing body at least show some leadership across the board here.
Yeah, it definitely would. And but like I said, if we're playing football this year and we play this fall, I think we'd have a great football season. And the Pac-12 not playing, I don't think anybody's really going to miss that. As long as the SEC, ACC, and Big 12 are playing, I think we'll be good. People will miss Ohio State, Penn State, and maybe a Michigan and Wisconsin. But, once again, I think there's plenty of good teams. And if the season plays out with the 6 conferences playing that are saying they're playing right now, I think it opens up the door for the American Conference to generate a team that could possibly make the playoff. In fact, today on PhilSteele.com, I'm going to do a blog saying that the 4th team I'm predicting for the playoff this year, taking out Ohio State, is putting in UCF. And last year I had the American rated the 5th best conference in college football ahead of the ACC.
Yeah, in terms of depth, I'm sure. The ACC is top-heavy, certainly with Clemson, but outside of Clemson, it's kind of a joke.
Yeah, that was the case last year with the ACC, no doubt. It was Clemson, Grand Canyon, and I'll ask you, Nate, who the heck was the second-best team in the ACC last year?
Gosh, I don't even know. I'd have to do some digging. I might run into a Louisville or something like that, but nobody jumped off the charts that are overly impressive. Nobody.
And yet, at the end of the year, the American Conference had 4 teams in the top 25. They had 5 teams with double-digit wins. They had Memphis playing in the Cotton Bowl. They had, a UCF team that lost 3 games, but those 3 losses were by a grand total of 7 points. Cincinnati was up there, SMU, Navy, so they had a lot of good teams. Now, this year, the ACC, that gap in the Grand Canyon I spoke of, has definitely closed. A team like North Carolina with 17 returning starters, including a quarterback in Sam Howell, makes them a contender. Remember, they were a 2-point conversion away from beating Clemson last year. Miami adds in De'Aaron King from Houston, and he's a guy that had 50 touchdowns, 36 passing, 14 running for Houston 2 years ago. I think he solves what was wrong with Miami last year, which was quarterback play, and all of a sudden they become a contender. Plus, they also bring in the American Conference's Defensive Player of the Year in Quincy Roche at defensive end, who had 13.5 sacks. You've got a team like Virginia Tech with 17 returning starters that played better once Hendon Hooker took over. And now you add in Notre Dame. All of a sudden, I think the ACC goes from the 6th best conference in college football. I had them up to number 3, but that was behind the Big Ten, so I guess I put them up to number 2 right now.
Phil Steele is our guest here on ESPN The Jock. Is that move for Notre Dame, you think, pretty permanent, or is that a temporary thing?
Clearly temporary. Notre Dame wants to be an independent, but they saw their schedule was slipping away, and they said, hey, we're out here floating, ACC, throw us a lifeline. The ACC was, we'll take you in for a year, sure. And I think it's a match made in heaven for this year. But Notre Dame is the one team that can survive as an independent, get its own TV contract, schedule anybody they want to schedule. If Notre Dame calls you, you're going to play them. So I think Notre Dame remains an independent, but it's a beautiful marriage for this year. And, Clemson has to play at Notre Dame. They may play again a second time in the ACC title game, or maybe in North Carolina's up there. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun watching the ACC play in a 15-team league this year with one division.
Phil Steele is our guest, nationally known as one of the best football analysts in the entire country. Phil, you've got a lot going on from a digital standpoint. Was there a platform you're not broadcasting on?
No, I think we're all over the place right now. But the one thing we did do this year that's different, Nate, is normally with the magazine, I print a couple 100,000, and they're everywhere. They're at Walmarts and grocery stores, just everywhere all over the country. This year, we only printed 50,000 magazines, about 1/4 what we normally do, and they're only available at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. So you won't be seeing the magazine everywhere like you normally do. If you want to get it, you got to get into a Barnes & Noble or Books A Million where it is exclusively this year.
There's a lot of talk around here with Missouri State and the hiring of Bobby Petrino. There's a little noise being made for a program that's just been a complete deadbeat for more than, 2 decades. But what is the viability, you think, of the Oklahoma game happening against Missouri State and the Bears?
I hope it does. The FCS, to me, is the big question mark. Is Missouri State proceeding with the fall schedule then?
They not entirely. So they are moving to the spring, but they are allowing for non-conference games to be played. So they're giving them like a handful of games. So there's talk of a game against Arkansas State.
That's good.
Yeah, well, the big reason why is because Oklahoma's going to cut a check for 600 big ones. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when that's on the line, you better bet your bottom dollar they're going to figure out a way to play it.
Yeah, I know. So, if that's the case and they're able to play, and I know Oklahoma State definitely wants to play, so I think that game should happen, definitely. And, I'll tell you one thing. On my website, I go back like 10 years on FCS stats and information. I'm really looking forward to the FCS playing in the spring by itself, which they would be. I think you'd have a lot of eyes watching it. So that, to me, would be a perfect situation for Missouri State to get that check now, keep the players invested right now at this second, and then take that whole thing into the spring. I think it'd be a beautiful thing.
But, Phil, I think the big question is if you do play in the spring, how do you come right back and then play in the fall? For a lot of people who will be going into their junior year, that's a quick turnaround, and is the risk worth the reward? Now, we've seen the players are resilient. They're ready to play. We know that. But, you're asking a lot of guys in a 8-9 month span there.
I think for the FCS it would be a reduced schedule in both. And, yes, especially if you had a team that went deep into the playoff, that would be extremely tough. But if you play a reduced schedule in both, I think there would be this would be the one year to take advantage of it because football fans are hungry for football year-round. And that's why they try these different spring leagues with the professionals. And a lot of times they almost work, but there would be a lot of eyes watching Missouri State that probably don't even know that Missouri State's nickname is the Bears if they're they just follow college football. So I think it would be a big positive for the FCS this year.
Who's a quarterback that, let's just look at Joe Burrow from last year, right? I mean, going into things, he was widely projected as maybe a second or third round pick, and then made his hay, certainly with the playoff run and what LSU was able to achieve a season ago. But who's a guy that you think you could circle going into this year that has the most to gain if they do play?
I'm going to say Jamie Newman of Georgia. Jamie Newman's a big guy. He's 6'4", he's about 230. He'll remind you a little bit of Cam Newton. Last year when he had his top two receivers at Wake Forest, their offense was a thing of beauty. I mean, he put up some big-time stats. Then he lost his top two receivers to injury with about 3 games to go. Their offense dropped off a little, but he's got the arm. He's got the mobility. Now he's playing with Georgia. And with that surrounding cast that he's got there at Georgia, yeah, all of a sudden a lot of people who maybe never watched Jamie Newman play a football game because he was at Wake Forest will be like, wow, who's this guy? So I think Jamie Newman could make a large jump up the charts this year.
In the SEC, the Missouri Tigers, a lot of interest around these parts. By luck of draw, they didn't catch many breaks from the SEC with the additions of LSU and Alabama on their schedule. But how do you match up the Mizzou Tigers in their first year under Eli Drinkwitz?
Yeah, I think that you're going to find most first-year head coaches are going to struggle this year because of the lack of spring. And with Drinkwitz only having 11 returning starters, only 3 spring practices, only 11 returning starters. Those are major things working against Missouri. I know when I talked to the coaches, I talked to about 110 of the 130 head coaches this year, and talking to experienced head coaches with experienced teams and saying, hey, coach, bad break about having no spring this year. They'd be like, you know what, Phil? We had our winter conditioning. We were ready for the spring. The only thing that's going to change is maybe that redshirt freshman's not going to jump over a junior via the 15 spring practices. But other than that, you put the ball in the field, we'll be ready to play. Talking to the first-year head coaches, a little bit different. They're like, Phil, I've never even seen these kids on the field. I have met them. I've Zoomed with them, but that's about it. And I think it's going to be a tough circumstance for most first-year head coaches. Then, as you talked about, getting those 2 teams added to the schedule on top of the schedule they had already with, Georgia, Florida, a vastly improved Tennessee, a vastly improved Kentucky this year. That's going to make for a pretty rough sled for Missouri. I think this is a rebuilding year for most first-year head coaches, and the fact Missouri's got an fairly inexperienced team this year as well with only 11 returning starters.
There's a widespread thought that Mizzou is in over their head in the SEC, but they did make it, into a couple of SEC championship games. Yeah, I mean, so maybe it is possible, but, man, they're going up against some tough recruiting grounds and trying to bring them to Columbia. They're still trying to establish really their roots in a very difficult and competitive conference.
I thought last year the table was laid out for Missouri. If that probation thing wasn't hanging out there, and to me it was a wrongful. There's no way that the school completely cooperated with the NCAA. You don't hit those type of schools with the penalty. And it looked like they had that opportunity. In fact, you look at the losses last year, double-digit favorite against Wyoming, double-digit favorite against Vanderbilt, double-digit favorite against Kentucky. This team could easily have been 8-0 heading into Georgia had it not been for those 3 inexplainable losses last year to teams that they were probably better than. Even when they played Kentucky, Kentucky was not the Kentucky that finished this season. They were a Kentucky team that was struggling offensively. So I think the table was laid for Missouri to actually make that noise in the SEC East last year. Not this year. Rebuilding year, I think, inexperienced first-year head coach. But I do believe the opportunity exists. And if Kentucky can do it, why can't Missouri?
Just 2 more for you, Phil. But do you think that Clemson, Trevor Lawrence is by far the favorite to win the Heisman moving into this season?
Yeah, it was between him and Justin Fields. Now, Justin Fields isn't playing unless somehow he finds his way to Alabama or something like that. Alabama needs a quarterback. We'll see what happens. But I think that right now Trevor Lawrence is a clear cut. My number 2 right now would be Sam Ehlinger at Texas. I think if Texas opens up the season strong, and keep in mind, last year Texas only had 8 returning starters, and this year they have 16. They were a very inexperienced team last year, and one that suffered a lot of injuries. They had 4 defensive backs miss the Kansas State game. So I think those injuries help them out this year. They're much more experienced, and if they get past that Oklahoma hump, by the way, in the last 6 years, the Oklahoma-Texas game has been decided by 7 points or less all 6 times, and Texas has won 2 of them. So it's not that big of a gap. If they get over that hump and all of a sudden Texas is contending for a playoff spot, I think Sam Ehlinger can break into that mix as well.
Okay, lastly for you, do you ever find that, like, just covering college football, it's so enormous, right? Like, there's just so many teams. It's amazing how you can keep, your hand in all these different conferences and leagues. It's pretty impressive, and it's a lot to follow.
Yeah, and it's all I do. I mean, don't ask me where the grocery stores are in the area. I just work on football, and that's all I'm about. So 365 days a year. I say that, and most people are like, yeah. Well, no. We finished the college football season. I got 6 months of magazine season ahead of me, and it's something where I talk to every single coach that's in the Sun Belt, and I talk to all the coaches that are in the MAC and all those conferences and stuff like that. Go over their team line by line. So I do know a team like ULM just as good as I know Oklahoma. And it is definitely a year-round thing. If you ask me a single question about the NBA or Major League Baseball, I couldn't even tell you who the star players were because I only have time for football.
Well, you know what? You cover it pretty damn well, so great stuff as always. And the best way to get the digital magazine and check out all of the different channels you're on is philsteele.com?
Yeah, philsteele.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at philsteele042. And once again, if you're out driving around looking for the magazine, it's only at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, or you can go right to philsteele.com and get it as well.
Hey, last thing for you. Have you ever been asked by a university to come on board or even an NFL team to work directly for them?
No, I think the NFL teams like to purchase the magazine to get a lot of the the players' names and stuff like that. But no, I have not yet been approached by that.
Huh. Well, I think they're missing out. Hey, you are a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate your time as always here on The Jock.
Hey, Nate, great talking to you this morning. At least we got to talk some football, huh? That made it
we
a
love
good day.
that. You bet. Phil Steele, take it easy, man. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nate.